All right, Digby, we're back. Is that better?
Yes, much better. Thank you so much.
You heard our technical difficulties music. All right, so I mean, I was saying before we were so rudely interrupted by technology that the difference is it's just incredibly stark.
It is stark, and this has been growing in intensity for a long time, as you point out. I mean, if you go back to the 90s, you can see the beginnings there, starting with. I mean, this is the history of the conservative movement, right? I mean, it's not like they were ever particularly, rational in many ways. I mean, there was always this anti-communism and this kind of crazy stuff going, all the way back to the right after the post-war period. But it has been growing in intensity since the mid-90s when the Republicans first took over the Congress. And this group, this sort of far-right group, started to gain prominence and power. And it has now reached a fever pitch. And I think people think that, well, they have to sober up here. I mean, they're going to have to get practical. This is crazy. You can't have Donald Trump or Ben Carson, as the front runners forever. The voters are going to get themselves together. They're going to pick, a somewhat normal candidate. Well, I mean, first of all, that assumes there is a somewhat normal candidate, and I'm not sure they're actually, the party itself has pushed so far to the right that that's not acceptable anymore to be normal. And second of all, I'm not sure that's even true. I don't get the sense that this is, just some explosion of ideological, wishing. This is who they have become. And I mean, there's been a lot, I'm sure you've talked about it many times, as have I, about the influence of the right-wing radio and the influence of the media and how, all of this is pushed, and then there's this gusher of big money into the system. But whatever it is, this convergence of all these influences, it has brought us to a point where we now have a front runner, or one of the front runners for president, who is absolutely completely angry that anyone would suggest that he didn't try to stab someone when he was a teenager.
Right.
That's where we're at.
I mean, there's two different things that's sort of going on here too with the Republicans, and I think it is the craziness has always been there, and this is sort of an argument I think that you and I both, among many others, were making in the aughts, which was that the balance of power, the sort of the critical mass was shifting dramatically and rapidly, so that those who were sort of marginal before, it's one thing where you had this sort of this anomaly in the House, right, in the mid-90s, but that was sort of the beginning of the cascade of the balance of power shifting to the nut jobbies, and they, you had a certain amount of nut jobs and then a certain amount of people who were pretending to be nut jobs. But what those people who pretended to be nut jobs did is they basically, I think in many respects without realizing it, recruited even more real nut jobs.
Yeah.
And now we're at the point, I mean, people have to just step back and think about this, because it's both hilarious and just sort of shocking when you think that the Donald Trump, who I think his 25%, let's say, maybe it's 22%, whatever it is, his fifth to a quarter of the Republican primary base, I think is completely durable. And it seems to be wholly based upon not this guy's positions, because they're all over the place, not his ideology, but literally his personality type, which is, best described in the vernacular as an a-hole. Right? I mean, honestly, like, what do people like about Donald Trump? He tells it how it is. He doesn't worry about being politically correct. In other words, he doesn't mind being offensive to people who are not white. He has a ton of money, and he's not embarrassed to flaunt it. And he has multiple trophy wives, and on and on and on. Whatever it is, it's just like a cartoon character, like Biff in Back to the Future. The other guy, like you say, is I think there's more and more evidence coming up that this is a guy who's sort of a little bit touched. I mean, let's talk about this for a moment. Like this story that he wrote in his book about being in the psychology class. Have you heard about this and what it turns out to really be? Because this doesn't seem to be getting. I think we're going to hear more about this story as the week continues. But tell folks just briefly about this story that he wrote about being in a psychology class where it turned out he was the most honest person, at least in this class at Yale.
Right. Apparently what happened was that he got word, and I'm unsure about how it was he was supposed to, people got this word. I guess it was from the article in the paper, in the student paper. I've been unclear on that. In any case, somehow or another, he found out that the final exams had been burned on a psychology class, which people aren't even really sure what this psychology class was, but evidently, it may or may not have existed. In any case, he says that he went and retook the class, and it turned out that in his telling that this was a test by a psychology professor to determine who were the honest students. And he was told by the psychology professor, and he says this very explicitly, that he was one of the few honest people in the class, and the psychology professor actually gave him $10 for coming and being honest enough to retake his test. Well, as it turns out, this was a prank, and there was no psychology teacher, doing this and saying that they were going to do. That he was rewarding the honest students. Neither was, is there any evidence that Ben Carson could have been one of those honest students, because that particular part of the story didn't happen. Now, I guess it's possible that he went and retook the test because he's kind of a fool, but not because, there was any kind of a greater thing. It seems as though he has, he's turned this into yet another of his stories of his great, his spiritual, intellectual, and emotional superiority over everyone else. How different, and not to mention his physical bravery.
His direct line to God too, right? Because wasn't it all predicated on the notion like he had been praying for to get $10, and he found a crumpled $10 bill on the ground, and then he got another $10 from the professor who said he was the most honest person in the class. And at one point through this whole thing, this is now, he's retelling the story, I guess, 20 years, 30 years out in his book, and now we're 40 years out. And people have gone back and found where the Yale Daily Record talks about how we pulled this prank and announced that people are going to have to take over a psychology test because it got burned. And it's unclear whether or not he went through the whole prank, and the whole prank was executed on him and him alone out of this whole class, and he never found out about it, or he sort of like absorbed this event that took place and sort of placed himself in the middle of it, where he comes out sort of like, as the one honest man. But in either scenario, there's a tremendous amount of delusion and it's hard to believe he could have gone through his entire life without realizing it was a prank. At one point he would have been like, hey, how come I'm not the only person who didn't get a grade on the psychology, or the only person with a grade, or when it never came up again? It's strange. It's very, very strange. Now, I should say, this is the least of the parts about Ben Carson that offends me as a candidate, but it's indicative of, and this is what I've been talking about since, Trump zoomed to the top. This is not about Trump. It's not about Ben Carson. It's about the Republican Party.
Well, yes, and look at what's happened to Ben Carson since this flurry of a variety of revelations that have come out, where he's become a front runner. So the press is going back for the first time apparently in his life and attempting to validate the stuff that he's been saying. And he has, made his entire campaign, the basis of it is his life story. He wrote a Facebook post last week in which he sort of, I want to talk to you, all my people, about myself and what's going on here, in which he explicitly made that the case. He said, I don't have experience. I am not a politician. He said, none of the founders had ever run for office, which is complete nonsense. But, he says that they meant for people like me to be, running the country, and this is my life. This is what I've done. I am this person. Essentially just going over his life story as that being the qualification for president. Meanwhile, people are going back and checking some of these stories, and it's becoming pretty bizarre. And the fact that they cannot really, they can't validate a lot of this story that supposedly, much of it has to do with his religion, where he, like the stabbing incident, he says was when he went after he tried to stab this person in high school or junior high, I don't remember, and he, the stab was deflected by the kid's belt buckle. And he was so stunned by this that he went into the bathroom, he prayed to God, and this was the moment that he found God for real and realized he had to, quote, turn his life around. Well, there's no evidence that this happened. It might have. I suppose it's possible that happened. But it's all part of this piece of him being, him telling the story of how he's pretty much what you said, anointed by God. That this is the, his trajectory in life has been bringing him to this point where he's going to lead the world, essentially, if he become president of the United States. And there are many people in the Republican Party who are, more than ready and willing to hear this. He kind of draws from the Christian side, and I think that Trump draws from the white working class male side.
Right.
But nonetheless, these are very, very powerful factions within the Republican Party.
Well, and
together, apparently they'll believe anything.
And together they make up more than 50%.
Yes.
And that's what's amazing. Like, there's no crossover, or there may be a little bit, but there is not like huge crossover between the Carson and Trump voters. These are guys who are both well over 20% and not drawing votes more or less from each other. And so we have seen, it's stunning to me. And I wonder if we're going to see, my hope was, and I don't know if this has been realized, is that Trump, at the very least, when he announced, my hope was at the time, like, this is going to force all of those mainstream reporters and pontificators to really acknowledge just who the Republican Party is, because, they went through this process of something's unique about Trump. There's something fundamentally different about him. And at the end of the day, it is only that he is the perfect representation of the perfect Republican. And I guess Carson is too. One is the sort of the free market fundamentalist, which is the sort of notion where you are morally superior if you're not poor, and even more so if you're a billionaire. And the other is if you are essentially a theocrat who, believes that really it's the apostles who were really the people who signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and have been here the whole time. And these are the guys who represent the sort of the hopes and wishes of what the Republican base is. And I just saw today where Ted Cruz has begun to attack Rubio and I actually think Ted Cruz is going to be the guy they end up nominating, as Rubio is one of the moderate faction. And the Rubio people are immediately responding with, "We are not."
How dare you?
How dare you say this? And it's just fascinating to watch. We've seen this trajectory, right, where McCain makes it through almost the entire campaign, but then has to appoint Sarah Palin. And where Romney never makes that pivot to the middle, right? The reason why he was nominated, Romney, was because he's moderate enough that he can win, and he could never be that guy. And now we're going the next step further, which is we're getting rid of the moderate, McCain and Romney, whether they were or not. Just the perceived one, and going straight for the sort of the most Palin-esque person we could get.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're exactly right there. And to me, I've been writing for months and months, and on paper, I thought that Marco Rubio was the guy who would make the most sense for the Republicans to nominate, because, he's young, he's Hispanic, he can go up against the old lady or the old man on the Democratic side. There's an argument to be made there. But Marco Rubio has a problem, and I'm beginning to believe he can't overcome it, which is his participation in the Gang of Eight on immigration.
Yep.
I think the party has gone so far, and that was his rationale, was he could be conservative. He was originally voted in as a Tea Party type guy, but then he got into the Senate. He did this immigration thing showing that he could, work with other people, and that he was, possibly going to be able to do some things that the party establishment knows has to be done if they're to survive. And he could make that pivot in the general once he got it. I don't think he can get it. The talk radio people are going absolutely ape on him now that he's starting to show some life, and I don't think he can. I don't think he can do it. So therefore, it's Cruz, and I think you're right about that. I think he's the one, and it's very interesting to me because the party, if you look at this 50% plus of the Trump and Carson voters, essentially they feel betrayed. They feel betrayed by the politicians. The people who have not, quote, fought for what they believe in, have not gone to Washington and accomplished what they promised. Now, these are people who clearly don't understand how the government is structured and how it works. They didn't understand that when you have a Democratic president, no matter what, you're not going to be able to get exactly what you want. That's just not going to happen. And especially when an enemy like Barack Obama, a Kenyan usurper, foreign Muslim agent that they all believe he is. So the fact that they assumed that they could get what they wanted by voting for a guy like David Bratt, say, or one of these congressmen, that this was their, that they have, this is the mandate. I voted for this guy. He's going to go to Washington. He's going to get what we want. And if he doesn't, he's betrayed us. That seems to be their beef, that they were betrayed by the Republican Party. So they're looking to these outsiders who, both of them, Trump and Carson, their argument is, I don't know anything about how this government works, and I don't care, because when I get in, I'm going to get it done. And that's it. I will get it done because I'm me. Carson, he's anointed by God, and Trump is anointed by Trump, and they both have this peculiar talent to get out, to go beyond the rules that are hindering the Republican Party from getting what they deserve. Now, this is a recipe for disaster for them because, clearly, no matter what, those two guys are very unlikely to win the presidency. But Cruz, on the other hand, has a very interesting argument along those lines, which is, I have been in there fighting this fight. I'm the one who stopped who closed down the government. I'm the one who stood up and fought for you, and they hate me for it. Right. Everybody in Washington hates my guts, just like they hate your guts. And I will go in there, and yet I, unlike Trump and Carson or whomever, I know how to work these levers because I'm actually, I've got a little bit more savvy about how this stuff works. I don't know if that will work for him, but I can certainly see him making it, and he's positioning himself to inherit those voters, the Trump and Carson voters, should they fall out. And, I think we all assume that at some point. I don't think Trump, I don't think he has the stamina.
Well, my theory about Trump has been all along is that he's not interested in becoming president. He's interested in appointing the president, and he has had the best relationship with Cruz. Cruz has been incredibly disciplined in making sure that he never steps on Trump's toes. And I think that I think what happens at one point, Trump says, a member of my family has a disease that could be fatal. I'm not sure. I'm not going to say because I respect my family, but I need to be able to give 175% as president, and I can only give 104%. And so I'm going to drop out and become chairman of Ted Cruz's campaign committee, essentially. But I mean, it's really fascinating, because I get these emails still like, we are so close to impeaching the president, and your dollars, they have been the Republican base. And it's really sort of like I think it's helpful to think of this as like the conservative movement with this sort of like this cellophane overlay of the Republican Party, which has structured some of this stuff as well. Like, this rules and stuff about and excuses about getting stuff done. This is all sort of harkens back to some version of G.W. Bush, right? Which is like, I don't need to be an egghead. I just need to be a guy guy who can sit down, have a beer, work this out. I'm the CEO president. I get it done. That type of mentality. And it's just now it's like that message sells to 60% of the Republican Party as opposed to 35% of the Republican Party, or at least the ones who are in charge of the nominations. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And so with that backdrop, let's shift over to the Democratic race, because it's I think there's been more and more talk about how striking it is to watch the Democrats debate or have a forum versus the Republicans. Like, the Democratic race has been, in some ways, a lot more substantive and particularly more granular. You know, some of the questions that Rachel was asking last night, or Friday night, I should say, were far more granular. In some respects, I'm starting to feel a little bit like there's not quite as much happening as there's space to happen. But I want to get your take on what the Democratic race has been shaping up to be, and particularly, you know, any thoughts that may have come out of Friday night.
Well, I thought, first of all, the forum, that format was I thought, really interesting for people who are interested in politics. I don't know whether or not that has quite the zazz that the Republican debates, or even the other debate format, that the Democrats had with Anderson Cooper. But for me anyway, and I think people who are really interested in actually, watching these people up close for a while be interviewed and being able to compare them one right after the other that way, which I think is really useful. How often do you get that, where you can see the three candidates like we did, one right after the other, answering similar questions, how they behave? This is interesting stuff. I just don't know whether or not it extends beyond, the political junkies who care about that. But regardless, they were all three very interesting. I thought O'Malley was, that's the first time I've ever seen him sort of be the person that a lot of people thought he was, which is a talented politician. He seemed loose. He seemed smart and in control of the conversation, and I thought he did very well. And the other two, of course, they're sort of positioning themselves in their place in the race in a way that's very interesting to liberal types like me, who are seeing this sort of Democratic Party. I don't think I've ever seen it before, right. Where, the argument is centering around, a progressive agenda on a level that is, I'm still a little astonished by it. But, there's room for it because the Republican Party is off, holding their circus on the other side of town, and it's almost non-political. It doesn't have any substance as far as a real agenda, or as you say, on a granular level. I mean, who knows what these people are thinking?
Well, the granular level on the Republican Party is exactly how many feet high and wide is the wall.
Right, and what color the beautiful door will be.
Yeah,
I mean, that's exactly right. So we're having two very, very different processes here, and it's almost a little dizzying for people like me because I'm covering both of them as you are. I mean, don't you find yourself kind of going, "Wow, I'm in two different countries here"? Sometimes I feel like I'm in two different dimensions. They are operating on very, very different premises. These two primary campaigns. So on the Democratic side, for me, this is a really, really great primary, and I hate primaries. They're family fights, and I don't have a stomach for that stuff. I really don't. And when it gets ugly, we always end up sort of kissing and making up afterwards. But there are scars, and it hurts. So for me, these are tough times on this sort of thing. But this time, I'm finding it to be I'm very optimistic because I feel like, the candidates are great, and I feel like they both have, or all three of them really. O'Malley actually impressed me the other night. I mean, he would be, I don't know. Everybody wanted Joe Biden,
right.
If Bernie and Hillary dropped dead, so why not O'Malley? I mean, he's as good as Biden. So whatever, it's fine. And I enjoyed that, that way of exploring, I think it's an excellent way to measure where the Democratic Party is right now. And I noticed, and you brought this up with me via email, this new Dem panic that's beginning, that the campaign is moving too far to the left and they really have to be careful, and you can't expand Social Security, and on and on. I mean, this is actually delayed. I'm surprised that it's taken them this long to kind of gather their strengths. The fix-the-debt people, they're also marshaling themselves for this. You're going to see the centrist wing of the Democratic Party. It's very powerful too. It's not just some tiny little faction.
Right.
These are very, very powerful people brought to you by Wall Street who are going to start exerting some pressure, and probably particularly on Clinton, but it's going to happen across the board, and we'll see, the panic set in, and then we'll see how the reporting starts to reflect that. And that's always very interesting, because I think most of the reporting comes from the centrist faction as well. So you end up seeing, we'll end up saying, oh my God, the hippies are out of control again. But for the moment, in this golden moment here, it feels as though the progressive faction has a voice, and it's a big voice, and it's one that people are actually hearing. And so, I come away from this rather pleased. I think the work of the last decade in pushing the Democratic Party to the left, away from the, they were at the right, and now suddenly, we actually have candidates talking about gun control. Nothing could seem more obvious for the left, the Democratic Party to take up than that. Fighting for Planned Parenthood. These are things that really, they weren't before, and now suddenly they are again. Of course they should be. And here we are. I think that is largely a result of the left kind of working, plugging away year after year, and finally bringing the party back around. And the other side has just gone completely over the cliff. So, my impression on Friday was, this is good. I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I wish all the debates could be like that. Of course, on the Republican side, it would take 4.5 months, because there's so many of them that we'd all be dying of starvation if we had to sit there and go through a format like that.
Yeah, no, it was a great format, and I think and we should say that this is obviously, it's rhetoric. One of the things in that new Dem piece is I think at the end where I don't know if it was Will Marshall, who was formerly of the DLC, but it was Ron Kind from Wisconsin. He said, I'd lie if I said I wasn't disappointed with the statement that she made on TPP. Everyone knew where she was on that and where she will be. But given the necessities of the moment and a tough Democratic primary, she felt she needed to go there initially. Now, look, this is what we experienced with Obama, too, right? I'm going to renegotiate NAFTA. And almost as he's saying those words, he sent Austin Goolsbee was one of his economic advisors to Canada, saying, he's not going to really negotiate NAFTA. When he says that, what he means is he's not going to. And so with that said, and you don't, with the idea that to a large extent, to the extent that there's been movement, it's been rhetorical, which is not nothing. Obviously, we're not necessarily, the Democrats are not necessarily in a position to execute some of this stuff. But I guess, and I say this as someone who is, I think, fairly open about being a pretty big fan of Bernie Sanders, that I'd like to see it go further, frankly. It seems to me there's space. Just to take a moment to do a little critiquing of what we saw, that Sanders is either running a campaign to win or to pull the conversation to the left. And I feel like he has achieved the latter in many respects, right? Much of what's going on in this in these forums and the conversations, and we've seen this with Clinton on Keystone and TPP, and to a certain extent with debt-free college and some other things that she has. I would imagine, and we can't know, that 6 to 8 months ago to a year ago, the positions she's taking now are are at least sounding more to the left than she anticipated she would have had to have done, right? I mean, I imagine so. Maybe that's not the case, but to the extent where it's hard to listen to what she's saying and Bernie Sanders, and I think unless you're extremely discerning, to see a lot of daylight there. I mean, is that right from your perspective? Like, the difference between free college and debt-free college, you need to dig into that to really see the difference, both from a practical standpoint, but then also from an ideological standpoint. And I don't think that distinction is being made clear enough, at least from my perspective. What's your take on that?
I think you're right, and I think the people have sort of staked out their loyalty for other reasons, which often happens on the Democratic side. There's the candidates are close enough that really that whatever distinctions are there end up becoming sort of more symbolic than substantive. But this is interesting because, Bernie Sanders, nobody's going to mistake him for a centrist. I mean, he just isn't, and he never has been. So the fact that he and Clinton are, they're even swimming in the same pond, in the same policy pond in this way it's kind of an astonishing turnaround. And I don't think you can give Bernie all the credit there. He's the guy who's that voice in the campaign. But you've had Warren out there.
Right. Oh, definitely.
There have been people for decades who've been pulling this. Now, to me, the distinction between the two of them is kind of, it does exist, and you really do have to look for it. But if there's a complaint that I think that people have about Bernie Sanders, it's that his entire worldview is class-based. I mean, he's a democratic socialist. So that all problems are sort of seen within that prism of class and basically economic justice. Whereas Clinton comes from, and that's not to say that Bernie doesn't care about social justice or, civil rights or anything. Of course he does. But I'm just saying that is his worldview. That's how he comes at the world. And if there's a criticism of him, it's that he too often sort of defaults to an economic policy agenda to answer the call for these other things, social justice and racial equality and what have you. Clinton, on the other hand, kind of has a clever way of transcending that, and the way she's doing it so far is she's addressing a lot of it toward women. She takes that economic argument and puts it into the sort of silo where it affects women, from family leave to, even on Social Security, where she's to the right of Bernie, who's openly for expanding it. She sort of put it into the silo of these very older women who need to have their Social Security expanded when they hit 80 or something, and they're just living in total poverty, and we have to fix that. So she's found this way of sort of combining, or what I think of as transcending, the social justice side, in particular toward women, and I think to some lesser extent on a racial level, with that class-based argument, and trying to pull these strands of the party together in that way. I think she's a little bit more successful at doing that than Bernie is, although he's starting to kind of find his way through that. I don't think it's a natural for him. And I don't even know whether it's natural for her, or this is a strategy or tactic. I don't even, give a damn, to be honest.
Right,
I don't
right.
care. I don't need politicians. I don't even pretend to see into their heart. That's not really important to me. But I have noticed that this is sort of a different approach that the two of them are taking. And I think hers, one of the reasons probably why she's appealing to, at this point, a broader range of people, is that her rhetoric, the way that she's sort of fashioned it around the social justice for women, with the economic policies, I think that's kind of speaking on a certain level to a bigger group, a bigger collection of factions within the Democratic Party. So, I don't know if that's true, but that's just how I've been seeing it. And I think it's kind of an interesting thing because, as for a progressive, this is all good, right?
Right. But and because I think what she's able to do when she does that is she's able to both sort of like include herself on some level, or not even include herself, but to have project a more intimate understanding, a more intimate experiential understanding on some level. And that, there are times where I feel like what Bernie Sanders is expressing is not as inclusive experientially. But that is, but that dynamic is what why I guess I'm starting to get a little mounting frustration with the Sanders campaign. And I want to see them go further, because I don't think that they're ultimately swimming in the same pool. Since we have this open playing field, and since, and it's true that Bernie Sanders is not the reason, is just like sort of almost the manifestation of the reason why she's having to sort of why she's moving in that direction. He's got to say, like, when you say only for old women, that's where the difference is that I'm not talking about just helping those that we can point to and say these are the most vulnerable. I'm talking about helping everyone, where we are fundamentally, because he'll say we need a revolution, but he's not really articulating what his vision is and how it's different from Clinton's. He's making the I'm more sincere about this argument, I've been here longer argument. This isn't, I'm not just talking the talk argument, but at the end of the day, he's not saying, here's the difference. When she says she wants to help the most vulnerable or the poorest, I want to help those people, but I also want to change how people who are not the worst off, who are not in fundamental crisis, but are in a slow rolling sort of like abyss, or nagging chronic pain as opposed to acute, potentially lethal pain. I want to alleviate that as well. And that's where the fundamental difference is. That's the difference between a society that says we're going to provide everybody a free college education and one where we're going to give you ways in which to pay off a debt. Or we're going to make sure that everybody under Social Security lives a life that is fundamentally better than the life that they're living now on Social Security, not just those who are doing the worst on it. And that I feel like he's not articulating, and I'm not, and maybe it's just that he doesn't have the experience, frankly, of campaigning in this wide of an arena.
Well, yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but you're right. I mean, there is a space there, obviously, as she has moved to the left, for him to open that up and make the full-blown kind of revolutionary argument that that maybe people are ready to hear. I mean, it feels like
if you're going to say the word revolution. If you're going to say the word revolution, you might as well tell them what you're talking about, because it's not going to be any more damaging than the word revolution in terms of your prospects.
Exactly, and he's already, and in America, if you're up there saying, yes, I'm a democratic socialist, and look at Denmark, it's a great country, I mean, you're already there, so you might as well, you might as well do it.
Take us all to Denmark, because I think we would actually look around and go, whoa, wait a second. I mean, we had once, I don't, was the guy Swedish, I think, or in our studio, and we were talking about, are there working, we were talking about the working poor in Sweden, and we were like, what do people who are working poor there, do? And he just looks at us and he's like, we don't have a word for that. We don't have that concept of working poor. If you're working, you're not poor. And that, frankly, that's pretty enticing. The idea that we can't even conceive of that here. That's so strange. So, I mean, that to me seems to be, he's leaving stuff on the table that I'm not quite clear why. And I would imagine it's sort of like a notion of, and if he's going for the win and somehow feels like I can't go that far, because I imagine, it's there in his policies. He's just not teasing it out. If he's going to go for the win, it seems to me that he needs to, really get more aggressive about providing a sense of what his policies are going to mean for the African-American community, and he touches on that. But I'm just saying from sheer politics, that's where he doesn't have the name recognition. He needs to catch fire in that community in a way that is extremely difficult for a guy with his resources, including lack of 25-year history of being introduced to these communities.
Yeah. Well, here's one idea I'll throw out there that Bernie Sanders should take up. If he wants to, he's already compared the U.S. to Scandinavia, and I cannot remember which Scandinavian countries have this and which don't, but I know that at least one has, which is a requirement for gender parity in representation. You have to have an equal number of men and women in political representation. That's just the law. And they're not the only country, but they do have some countries that are like that. I think that's a revolutionary idea. I think it would be it would shock the hell out of people, just the mere idea that our great meritocracy would require quotas, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine the argument. But it would be a good one, and it would be one of those that isn't economic. It's not an economic argument. That's one that it goes directly to, certain socialistic ideas of social justice that I think would be really, really exciting if he were to take that up, and it would kind of throw a shot across the bow of Clinton's.
Right. How do you answer that if you're Hillary Clinton? I mean, it's going to be very uncomfortable for you to say at that point, like, no, I don't think that should exist. Right. I mean, that's the idea. Exactly. Is that, either way, it seems to me that for Bernie Sanders, for what he's trying to build, whether it's to win or to build a movement, it is incumbent upon him, since he has put down that marker, right? He's the only democratic socialist that anyone in this country that more than 10% of the country could name, right? I mean, he's it. He is supposedly, in the context of our politics, the outer definition of left. And it seems to me that if you're going to put down that flag, either consciously or unconsciously, you got to really be left, and that may mean pushing it even further, because I think that's what it's going to take also for him to gain more traction. Because I think people found him, I certainly did, more charming than he's ever been in that Democratic forum, right? I mean, the guy, I get the sense now that he's a funny guy to be around.
Oh, I love the guy. I mean, honestly, everything about him, his personality, his record, I've always been a big fan of Bernie Sanders. If you're a liberal in this country, a real, progressive or liberal, socialist, whatever, this has been your guy for a long time. He is a terrific guy, and he's got a lot of appeal. I don't know how far that goes. He's a New Yorker. He's got, he does have the whole, Larry David thing, and I don't know if that hurts him or helps him. I don't know one way or the other. But, to me, he's very, very, he's a very charming, accessible, obviously decent human being that I'm thrilled that he's saying and doing what he does. I can't get enough of him, really. I just hear what he says, and I'm always kind of, But you're right. He does have room to go further. I wonder, and I don't know if this, I'm just talking out of the top of my head, but, he does have a very traditional campaign manager in Tad Devine. That guy, he's a professional, he's a hired gun, and I don't know how far he thinks it's safe for Bernie to go. I think he is probably pushing him to be much more negative in the campaign. I personally think that's a mistake for Sanders. I think that goes against his brand in a way that is. I just used the word brand, didn't I? Ugh.
Well, but I
it
think
goes against his image in a way that I think would be detrimental.
The idea is right, is to create some definition for yourself and for your opponent. And there's two ways to do that. And the first way has been ineffective at this point because Clinton has been so effective in talking and sounding very similar to Bernie Sanders, at least on those areas where there's a distinction. And then she has her own sort of like, quiver full of arrows. And if you aren't willing to go even further and take her essentially into the deep end of the pool where, we really start talking about things that are left, then the only thing you can do is you have to push her further into the shallow end, right? And so I think it's a mistake and it's a missed opportunity. And I wonder if it isn't a reflection of the limitations of his campaign management, because these ideas, you're going to say I'm a socialist. You're out there already. Let people know what that actually means, because that's going to sell better than the term socialist.
Yes, absolutely, because then at least you put some meat on the bones of what socialism means. And in fact, I mean, we don't know. I mean, look at the weird crap that the right wing is selling. I mean, is there any reason to believe that anything Bernie Sanders says is going to be any more out there than what they're selling? I mean, this is, we've got the front runner for the Republican Party out there saying he's going to save the world by being a better negotiator with China. I mean, and Japan, and how they're killing us, and he's going to make Mexico pay for a wall. I mean, that is nutty stuff, and that's not even the nuttiest of the stuff that we're hearing. So, I don't think that there's a lot of risk in this campaign for Democrats. I mean, despite with the new Dems, the timorous new Dems, just, oh my goodness, the left is getting out of hand again. No, sorry. I mean, look at the other guys. That's not a problem. I mean, I don't think it's hard for me to imagine how the left could say anything that would be equal to the lunacy that's coming out of the right, and therefore they are positioned to be the proverbial grown-ups in the room. No matter what, I think even Bernie Sanders, coming out for, a guaranteed wage, whatever. There are a million things he could be saying. And I don't think it would sound crazy compared to what is happening on the other side. So, there's kind of a unique opportunity here, isn't there, to push the envelope beyond what we normally would think was acceptable, even under those terms, even under the terms that maybe, Tad Devine is saying, hey, Bernie, don't go too far, because, you if you want to win, you're going to have to, pivot to the middle or do whatever they always say. But, where's the middle right now?
Well, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems to me that the first thing he's got to do is get through the primary before he starts worrying about pivoting to the middle.
Well, exactly.
And you've got Marco Rubio.
That would be a unique challenge.
You've got Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and Ben Carson, I think, already saying no exception on abortion for rape or incest. I mean, that alone to me seems like they've wrapped themselves in a cape of lead, and they're not going anywhere. I mean, seriously, like I don't know what would be the functional equivalent on the left for that. I really don't. But
gun confiscation. If there was a Democrat out there who said, when I become president, I'm going to confiscate every gun in America, that would be the equivalent as far as I'm concerned.
And
of course,
everyone needs to wear
that.
denim jumpsuits, like those worker clothes. Like
Right.
Digby, as always, a real pleasure to talk to you. I imagine we'll have the opportunity to have this conversation again, particularly following, we've got the Republican debate coming up tomorrow night. Yeah. The juxtaposition is just, it really is weird. I mean, I feel like on one hand, I'm doing something that is like very sort of literal and wonky-ish one day, and the next day I'm like, I know, like doing like I don't know, critiquing cartoon, like drawing. Like,
I know.
It's
disorienting.
It's weird.
It's disorienting, and I keep writing about this sort of, meanwhile, I write about the Democrats and their, sort of arcane arguments on the stuff like student debt, and then meanwhile in bizarro world, right. We have this freak show going on that is just, I mean, that's what I'm saying. This is like two different two different dimensions that our politics are happening on, which is really fascinating. I mean, I hope that somehow we're able to sort that out over this, because this says something very interesting about our country. I just don't know what it is yet, but it's
so
interesting.
strange.
For sure.
It's like as if PBS decided one day, like, we're going to program a block of programming where we have like a 2-hour Bill Moyers, documentary, and then we're going to just follow it up with SpongeBob.
Exactly, and we assume that the same people are going to be, that somehow or another that everybody has to watch both and make a decision as to which one. Which one gets is going to run things, SpongeBob or Bill Moyers?
I've never been more sort of open to the idea of like, let's just split up the country. Let's just do it and get it over with.
God. Well, I think we're split, and we're just split in a very weird way. And I guess the question that we're all going to have to ask ourselves is, what's the road back to a country? We've never been really together. There's always been these splits, but this is so dramatic, so different than anything I've ever seen. The two parties are on completely different tracks, and I'm not what has to happen, and I'm not sure that what everybody thinks will happen, which is that the Republicans will recognize that they've gone too far, and they'll decide to moderate, and then they'll nominate John Huntsman, and everybody will be happy. That I don't see that. They're so far gone. I don't know how that happens. So my imagination is not.
We're going way long here, but I haven't even heard a viable explanation of how you get there. It is, they're going to overreach. They're going to nominate Ted Cruz. He's going to lose badly. And then everything's going to go into a hidden black box, and they're going to come out the other side and they're going to be reasonable. Like, I don't understand that process, because the difference here is that, when Goldwater, when Goldwater happened and they had this sort of reevaluation, or I guess for the Democrats, it was, McGovern or Dukakis, and then all of a sudden you get Bill Clinton ultimately, or, they were just talking on a presidential level, and they had this sort of latitude because the parties were sort of like not shut off from any direction. But now it just seems to me to be like, the reason why when Ted Cruz loses, it's not going to be just that he was too centrist, because that's not what it's going to be. It's going to be because he was sabotaged by the establishment wing of the Republican Party, and they're going to go even further and become more vicious. That's what's going to happen.
Exactly right. That is exactly right. Conservatism can never fail. It can only be failed. And the Republican Party is their enemy at the moment, and will continue to be as long as if conservatives lose. That's just how they see it, and I don't see any way around that. And also let's look at what the Republicans did in the 1960s. They nominated, after Goldwater, they nominated Richard Nixon.
Right.
It's not like they, and I get, so Nixon was considered more of a moderate, but I think we know better. And they knew better, too. The only reason Nixon could go to China is because he wouldn't be red-baited by Richard Nixon. And so I don't honestly think that theory plays out in the Republican Party. It did in the Democratic Party. There's no doubt about it. After McGovern, they all went and licked their wounds and, started nominating the most milquetoast people they could find, and basically, tried to work their way back to the middle, and they allowed the right to define them. That doesn't happen on the Republican side, and I think it's much worse today than it used to be. I agree with you, but I do think that their instinct is to double down. It's not to retreat and withdraw. Look what happened after 2012. They had that postmortem.
The autopsy,
they did
right?
Their autopsy, and it was pretty clear what they had to do. Did they listen? No. They don't.
Well, I know what
whatever,
happened at that autopsy. They had set up one of those devices that runs electricity from a bolt on the top of the building, and when the lightning struck the bolt, it reanimated the corpse, and the corpse got up and started walking through the village. And
right,
and
that's exactly what happened. And that monster ain't going anywhere.
No.
I mean, that monster is out of control, and he is, he's heading for the village, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how you deal with that.
I think the solution.
I
think the solution is after Ted Cruz loses. I think it's what we're going to see is either one of two things. We're going to see Eric Erickson start a new party and they'll call it the Erickson Party, and there'll be only the Republican Party and the Erickson Party will be two small minor parties in the country, and
what?
You have basically, global warming gets to the point where we all come together because we've lost a significant portion of land mass here, and we've really got to invade Canada so that we have a place to live, essentially.
Well, there's a happy thought.
Right.
There's a good one. That's a nice way of dealing with this. Let's hope we'll all come together under in our dystopian hellscape.
Exactly. Digby, a great place to end it. Hopefully next time we talk, we won't be there yet. So.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, thanks for having me, Sam. I enjoyed it as always.
Pleasure. Thanks, Digby.